we're going to move on to our panel, who are free to pick up some of the threads of these questions which we've been listening to, but we're going to look at some specific things for them as well. Now, we're going to be hearing from Yamina Saheb, who writes a lot about sufficiency and policy design around achieving sufficiency, and was a contributing author to the current report, and is a lead author of the forthcoming IPCC report. We're going to hear also from Markus Terho, who is involved with Shift 1.5, looking at work specifically in the situation in Finland with Sitra, and also from Valbjørn Sørensen, who's the executive director of the KR Foundation, to whom we're all enormously grateful for creating the space within which these conversations can happen. But I'm going to start with Yamina, because this question of sufficiency, again, perhaps in the level of the popular debate, it could be quite easily misunderstood for the old things they used to say about environmentalists wanting to go and live in caves and wear Hessian sacks on their back, etc. But obviously, it's a much more sophisticated and detailed and nuanced sort of understanding of the changes we need to make. So I wondered if you could talk about a little bit about how the sufficiency approach differs from other current approaches at the moment.
Thank you for the short introduction and for the opportunity to contribute to the report and to this webinar launch. So currently, when we think about decarbonizing the global economy, we think mainly about efficiency improvement. So having a more efficient fridge, more efficient home, for example, and the decarbonization of the supply through the increase of the share of renewable production, energy production. And by doing these two, we miss actually around 30% of the emission reduction potential, because we don't do the first thing that we should be doing is questioning how do we need all these large homes? Do we need large cars? Do we need all these appliances and equipment that we have at home, etc.? And sufficiency is not new concept. Actually, it dates back even to the Greek time, the Greek civilization. However, using sufficiency as sustainability concept goes back to 30 years ago. And sufficiency, when you look at today, we have much more literature on sufficiency than 10 years ago. And when combining all the literature that exists on sufficiency, so I did come up with a definition of sufficiency, which I define as all the measures, the policy measures, and the daily practices. So this answers the point from Lewis about the behavior versus behavior change of individuals' behavior versus the structural changes. So we need the policy measures and the daily practices that avoid, and it's very important to the main difference between sufficiency and efficiency is that sufficiency avoids the demand for energy, materials, land, water, and other natural resources, while delivering well-being for all or decent living standards for all within planetary boundaries. So sufficiency does not mean that you will live in caves, or you will reduce the level of comfort that you have. It's just that adjust your the way the comfort is delivered and your perception of what is comfort. Is it more comfortable to be alone in 500 square meters, or to be in space or sharing space with other people? And by sharing space with other people, you keep your privacy, of course, but by sharing space with other people, you reduce your energy demand and emissions, but you will also enjoy life better than when staying alone as an old person in 500 square meters. This is what sufficiency is about.
This is a wonderful image of the way in which making the changes that we need to make for survivability and to flourish also allows us the possibility of better lives. And I want to bring Markus in on the conversation now, because Markus, as I understand it, has been involved in generating a significant public discussion in Finland around these issues, and somehow or other has managed to engage at least 1 in 5 of the entire population. And I just want to ask you quite straightforwardly, how have you done that?
Okay, simply put, what we've done in Finland is look at a way, how do we involve everyone in this change? And we have chosen not to speak about carbon footprint to people, but to talk about how do you build good life that is sustainable. And we can make 100 different suggestions to you from which you can pick things that suit your current situation in life. And we can see that over 1 million people in Finland have engaged with this content. And those people who have built a personal plan of what to reduce and how to change can achieve, on average, in the first year of engagement, a 30% cut in their personal carbon footprint. If we can reproduce that in the coming next 9 years, we have already cut by 51% the original carbon footprint. And very kind of simply, rule of thumb, every 10 years for the next 30 years, we need to cut by 50%, and we are meeting the goal that Louis and the team are proposing here. And I think that that's the second part. How do we talk about the change path so that you are in control? No one else is pushing their favorite solution, what you should change. We should not look at what other people should do. We should look at what can I do to become part of the solution. And we think that it's possible to include a lot of people in this change, not only in Finland, but in other countries as well. So now we have 9 different countries. We have changemaker teams who are starting to use the same methods that we have produced in Finland. And that's the next step. So how do we make this change happen across many countries without the fact that every changemaker has to create their own tools, own ways of working? But how do we build on work that others have done so that we can take the science that Louis and the team have provided and take that into action so that people know what to do on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and how to keep track of their change path.
That's wonderful, Markus. So you've got a real kind of picture of how people can land all these big issues in a really practical day-to-day fashion in their day-to-day lives. Okay, I'd like to bring Brian into the conversation now, because in many ways, this is still a relatively new area for people, and the KR Foundation have been pioneers in opening up space in doing this. And I'd really like to hear from Brian. What was it that led you to decide to do that, and how you have seen the response of the rest of the philanthropy sector to this? Are they now picking it up too, or are you still sort of out there as sort of pioneers on your own?
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for having me. I see a lot of people attending whom I have a lot of respect for, working in this space. Well, it goes back to KR Foundation's mission, which is to address the root causes of climate change and environmental degradation. The foundation was set up in 2015, so we're relatively young, and almost immediately we set up a program to fund in the sustainable behavior and lifestyles space. We just quickly realized that to serve our mission, there was no way around addressing behavior and lifestyles in the fight to preserve a livable planet. But in order to engage in this area, one needs to know what a sustainable lifestyle is, right? When we started out back in 16 with the program, there wasn't yet an evidence base built around the Paris Agreement and the 1.5-degree target. And this all came together in the first 1.5-degree lifestyles report, which has been instrumental in making the conversation on behavior much more concrete, much more specific. And that's quite important for funders to engage. I mean, one just remembers the numbers, right? It's 2.5 tons in 30 and 0.7 in 2050. And that's just such a sobering, very, very powerful message. So where does philanthropy stand? I think this is still a very, very difficult space for philanthropies to engage in. Some funders are moving into the evidence building kind of space, as we've been funding for quite a while with this brilliant work and the sustainable, the Cambridge Sustainable Commission, which Johan mentioned earlier. Also the UNEP GAP Chapter 6 report on, or the Chapter 6, the latest UNEP Emissions GAP report on lifestyles. We had a hand in. And we're also funding some of the integrated assessment modelers at Utrecht University to factor in behavior change in these models, because a lot of them are still heavily biased towards technology in that climate policy nexus. Another area where foundations can engage is in communication. Basically, just fund good communications efforts, and I think Rapid Transition Alliance is doing in this space is a really, really good example. There's advocacy efforts there's specific on-the-ground behavior change projects, and then finally there's capacity building. I would say those were the 5 buckets that philanthropy could fund in. But it is, for many of the reasons that Lewis has already touched on, it is difficult for many foundations to engage, because frankly speaking, philanthropy is also a symbol of a lot of wealth and inequality, right? So there's this contradiction, which just makes it very difficult. We're a young foundation with a very sharp purpose to address the root causes of climate change, and that's just made it easier for us to engage. I mean, we have to engage in this space at this level.
Thanks, Brian. And that's a really good cue, perhaps, for a question which I can put to all 3 of you, which has been touched on a little bit by others, but it is the big one, and it's coming up again and again in our question. And this is the question of the inertia of the way things are at the moment, and that power is a big part of that. There's a lot of vested interest in what we do. So we can do our active and positive visualizations, but there is a question of how do we deal with power, with the sort of locked-in nature of elites and an elite sort of lifestyles, and what are the most effective steps that we can take to organize to address that? And I think we might as well go back through in the same order that we started with. So let's hear from Yamina. And these are just quick answers. And
sorry, I was talking to myself. Thank you. So one of the challenges that we face is that policies should be evidence-based, and I was delighted to read Brian, to hear Brian saying that they are funding some modeling work, and the evidence-based actually comes from the models and the scenarios to meet the 1.5 degree target. And if you look at all the overall scenarios that exist that claim, because people claim first that they are Paris compliant, you have around 1,000 scenarios that are today claiming that are Paris compliant. When you dig into the details, out of the 1,000 scenarios, there are only 3 that include sufficiency measures and lifestyle changes. All the rest, at the best, they include bit of behavior change, and the behavior change, they expect the behavior change to occur within the current existing infrastructure and cities, etc., which is just impossible. And we learned this from the Corona crisis, actually. It was, no one would have thought that Paris, for example, would speed up the biking lines like they did it because of the Corona crisis. By increasing the number of biking lines, not just in Paris, but also in cities in the developing world, in Bogota, for example, and in many other places in the world. So what happened is that people shifted. The behavior change cannot occur. Actually, the impactful behavior change cannot occur without offering to people the infrastructures that are needed. But to have policymakers making this change, we need to have scenarios based on lifestyle changes. And this is the missing piece. Maybe given that I have Brian here, maybe this is where foundations should focus, because currently all the I told you, out of 1,000, you have 3 scenarios. It's today in 2021, why we are in climate emergency. You cannot understand that. The young generation cannot understand that. And the point is,
Yamina, I'm just going to jump in there because we're really tight on time, and I want to hear very quickly from Markus and Brian. But that was a brilliant late pitch there, but perfectly slipped in. And the sorts of examples that Yamina was talking about, there's lots of stories about these changes like Paris and Bogota happening in practice on the rapid transition side. But to Markus, very quickly.
It's a question of what do you believe is your most efficient way of driving change in your society. And we believe that bringing visibility to the grassroots level change that is already happening is at the moment missing. And we need more sophisticated tools for that. Once politicians, the elite and others see that normal, regular people are already changing their everyday practices, they are willing to change many things, but there are obstacles. They are locked in certain places. Then our politicians can be braver, our companies can be more innovative, and we will get companies, policymakers, the societal change makers, and individuals work in harmony towards 1.5 degree paths.
And a last word to Brian.
I can just add, and philanthropy to what Markus said.
Yes.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Brian. So just to finish, thank you all so much for joining us. Please go away, read the report, share it, use the hashtags fair consumption and 1.5, 1 the number, point the word, and 5 the number. That's hashtag fair consumption and hashtag 1.5. Keep the conversation going. We're only just beginning here. We need to build up a big community of interest and practice around this to make it happen. Follow this space, follow all the wonderful people you've listened to today, and thank you very much for being here. Thank you, and see you again.